Welcome, everyone. Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Christ consciousness. I want to talk about the update on good old Michael Aquino, the interesting character out there that we're trying to find out what is going on. Is he connected to any of these horrific events that are going on? Certainly is the poster child and named everywhere. Now, the latest thing we've come out on Michael Aquino is that apparently the famous honest FBI agent retired that investigated pedophilia, etc., particularly the McMartin case and the Jeffrey McDonald case, the Special Forces Green Beret who was accused of murdering his family. Ted Gunderson was in communication with Michael Aquino, even claimed by his girlfriend at the time, who was living with him, that he would talk to Michael Aquino daily for at least an hour. And a lot of people find that strange, that Ted Gunderson, supposedly on one side of this investigation, would be talking to someone who may be involved on the other side. Well, first of all, this is not unusual, or shouldn't be if you're a real investigator. Now, the interpretation of this woman who, can we give any credit to that? She's just an average woman. I think she was involved in the McMartin case, and that's how Gunderson met her, and they ended up dating and becoming a couple. I'm not sure how far that went. And once she broke up from him, of course, there's a lot of the usual sour grape situation. So she was insinuating, or this reporter who doesn't seem to really get anything, and you have to really wonder the seriousness of his information, but certainly can't interpret anything. Certainly isn't open-minded enough, because he won't talk to anybody that he doesn't agree with or will give him different information. So it's all about pat me on the back, let's be friends, who on top of it has a terrible past history. But Gunderson, the ex-FBI head of the LA division, or whatever division that was at one time, was communicating with him. And of course, why wouldn't you? You would think that Michael Aquino would have some sort of ins or know the gossip in certain satanic organizations. Now, this is not really true from what I know. Most common Satanists didn't really like the Temple of Set. The Church of Satan had a running battle with the Temple of Set for many, many years because he was an offshoot or a traitor to Anton LaVey. So there was always, for many, many years, a contradictory attitude, a conflict between the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set. And there were several other groups, particularly the Temple of the Vampire, which was popular for a while in the late 80s and 90s. Well, all these groups used to conflict to some amount. Then at a particular period of time, I noticed that they all got together. Towards 2000, the late 90s, they started to work with each other from what I could see. I'm not sure what went on there, but it was fairly interesting to see them communicating with each other together. Now, I don't think the Temple of Set was involved. A lot of people did not like the Temple of Set or Michael Aquino because he ran this kind of militaristic, very controlled organization. And I actually spoke to the head of a violent satanic gang that claimed how he didn't like the Temple of Set or the people involved in it. And these are the people that, if there was any, which were involved in criminal activities, which I know for 100%. Now, these criminal activities and being connected to violent street gangs, this means that they were involved in pedophilia and other things as well, because there's huge amounts of money in that, shockingly so, and apparently participating by huge amounts of people. It's very frightening to think of how common this is from what all reports seem to report. So the fact that Ted Gunderson would talk with Michael Aquino daily, well, the woman said he did this because it made him feel important, Ted Gunderson. Made him feel good. I don't know how that would make you feel. It's not like talking to Michael Aquino is some sort of master streak. I mean, if you look at who's interviewed him, there's hardly anybody of any note that has spoken with Michael Aquino, other than his original days with Geraldo Rivera, where they put on those shows and Oprah. Well, this is during that time of the Satanic Panic, as they claim. And he was the guy presenting himself and going out there. I don't think there's anyone else that did it. Now, Anton LaVey wouldn't go on the shows. His daughter showed up with Aquino and went on the shows. So she was around. I'm sure they love to have this attractive female sitting next to Michael Aquino, but there wasn't anybody else that I'm familiar with that did much of anything. If you hunt up Michael Aquino's interviews as of today of where he's went on, well, he's spoken to a lot of nobodies. The only person he ever spoke with was that had any note was the one interview he did with who's that guy? Now, I can't remember it. Oh, with the Sean Stone, Oliver Stone's son, who has a TV or a actual web thing called Buzzsaw interview. That's the only person who I've seen as of recently that has interviewed Michael Aquino of any note. He's done several different interviews, people who are satanic based and or what it considered friends, and a few other interviewers that apparently it was fairly easy to get him on a show. No, he wasn't really a guest that he was sought after. So Michael Decon is one who's basically got a small web show, a YouTube channel, really not anybody of overly note. So it wasn't all that difficult. So I don't know how this would be a big ego boost for Ted Gunderson, but you're trying to find out about satanic organizations. Well, you want to talk to somebody who's been involved with these groups, and we don't know how many more, for 30, 40 years. Certainly, he would be an interesting person to talk to and would have his ear to the ground to a certain extent of what's happening in that community. There was a lot of cross members that went into the Temple of Set. A lot of people have went into the Temple of Set, but the Temple of Set has always been this kind of intellectual organization where they push people, where you're required to do things. You know, this never works. I tried it for years to push people to do things, to study, to read books. They refused to do it. Plain and simple. So the Temple of Set was always an organization of this pseudo-intellectual. I hate to say they're intellectual because I think they're off the mark, but these were people of note. Don Webb was a writer. I'm assuming he went through the process, written many books. He's a professional man. You have of course, Edred Thorson, who was some sort of junior college teacher, wrote a lot of books. So this is the kind of people that you get in the Temple of Set. And of course, there was a woman who ran it for 8 or 10 years who was a professor at Berkeley. And I'm not sure what the guy today, there's some guy running it today, I believe, out of New York, who's running the Temple of Set. And I'm assuming has went through all the study and everything else. But their policies is that you cannot be sitting back and doing nothing. You have to learn, you have to advance, and if we believe the book written by Jenny Graham Scott, The Magicians, which gives you an excellent insight into the organization, they wanted you to evolve. If you didn't evolve, if you didn't keep learning, you actually got demoted. And if you caused any kind of trouble, were promiscuous, took drugs, or drunk, they threw you out. I mean, that's the image of the Temple of Set we have, which is pretty much fits the image of this military leader and his Boy Scout, high-level Boy Scout, becoming an Eagle Scout, and then I think taking over command. This is the kind of guy he was. So to think that there's a whole bunch of slovenly, uneducated slobs that don't want to do anything but dance around naked and take drugs, well, it certainly didn't seem to be the case. Certainly the Church of Satan had more of those types, but at the particular time it was formed, apparently it drew upon a fairly intelligent group of people who were in the San Francisco area at that time. So I'm not sure what that's all about, but they certainly had their many different types. And Anton LaVey tried and was unsuccessful at trying to make money off of this strange group. There was never enough money involved, and that's what killed the organization. Now, the Temple of Set really never needed money. It wasn't about money. He had money. He had his own personal money as an officer, which are paid very well. He also had money from Mother, who was involved in the organization, supporting it even before her death. And then left him millions upon her death. And apparently Daddy was fairly wealthy as well. So Aquino's an interesting little guy. Now, this is the only thing that we've gotten from not a very reputable source, but somebody had told him that Gunderson was talking to Michael Aquino daily. And of course, this would be a good idea if you were trying to find. Now, this information come from a guy who was insinuating that he was involved with this, and even insinuated that Gunderson was not presented any information of any value and never really caused any particular arrests or helped cases. He discovered information, some of it he gave to the court, some of it didn't. This was the story there on him, which certainly is a misinterpretation of the facts that I can tell. Maybe there's something to it, but in terms of the fact that he wasn't maybe that smart of a legal guy, after all, just because he was an FBI agent doesn't necessarily mean he's all that intelligent or understands the court system. But anything you brought to the court system that had to do with the Satanism was generally rejected and became laughed at. I mean, that's the only thing new we can actually find on Aquino. And Aquino is mentioned in several different books, including the one I recently reviewed, The Transformation of America, who this woman claims that she was involved in this brainwashing, MK12, etc. And she certainly could have been, and I believe a lot of the books. What I don't believe is a lot of the details in the books, because they're going to fill your head with, if you're being brainwashed, they're going to put in things that are not real that you believe are real. They may even put things like all the celebrities she named, because this will be something when you come out that either gets you in trouble or people laugh at because they'll never believe you. A fact like Chris Christopherson, the fact that there was lots of bestiality, particularly with Ronald Reagan, and also sex with Ronald Reagan, who I don't believe was even able to sexually perform by the time he made it to the White House. I mean, people don't understand it. Here's a guy who had Alzheimer's. It's very difficult as people get older and older for them to sexually perform, males, because of the getting the blood product. I think that was even before Viagra. So it's unlikely that he would be able to sexually perform. And she goes into details of that. She also goes into the details of being horribly beaten and whipped and tortured, and her jaw knocked out of alignment. Now, these things are horribly painful. You're not going to be able to do anything for a long time. If you've been whipped and are bleeding, you're going to have horrible scars over your entire body, and you're certainly not going to be able to perform like she did that night, going to receptions after laying on the floor bleeding from being whipped. Now, this seems to be a bizarre way of doing things, and while this is a sexual fetish for some people, it's done in a very particular fashion. And after you go through these things, you're not able, you don't go back to normal. I'm not sure if you ever go fully back to normal, but by the time the swelling and everything else goes down, you're talking about weeks, possibly even months. So all of this is something that we need to look at very carefully, of what kind of truth factors. Now, was she abused? Was she part of this all? And I believe all these things happen. I'm not surprised by it. What I'm surprised by is the details you get from so many people that don't add up. Similar to another case with that, who claims all sorts of things happened, and then after Daddy did this to me, it was okay, we're buddies now. And then when family came out and said, well, we were tortured, the people involved in that, including the person who wrote all this, didn't back up his family. What is going on here? This doesn't add up. Neither does it add up that you're going to be this tortured and get away with it. So the point is, you're going to be having people in terrified situations that will not be able to perform. There's no way that she could be physically abused the way she was physically abused and continue to do what her type of sexual favors and other things she was asked to do. There's no way you could do that and be physically able to do it, number one. And number two, not having a horrible scarred body, which she claimed that she actually did photo shoots for Hustler magazine. Well, she would have been horribly scarred. So I don't understand how you get away with these certain things, and all the stories are a little bit too much over the top in terms of, certainly these things happen. Maybe they were mentally programmed to understand and think they went through these things as a way of frightening them, etc. But of course, she names Aquino as being part of her torturers, part of being raped by her, and everything else that was around there. But the one interesting with these phone calls, particularly at that time, you got to remember, I don't know what time he was having daily phone calls, but that means somebody had to be at a particular place at a particular time where you could then connect with them. So if someone was out doing all sorts of trouble, I find it hard to believe that you could phone them every day and chat with them, and they would take time to do that. So as usual, we just don't know. There's so much ifs, ands, and buts to all these cases that it makes it difficult, especially when there's no enforcement or charges brought against somebody, that they are being protected that much. And it does seem to be a very, very true that these people are highly protected up to the highest levels. So there's no way to get to them. Nobody cares. If you bring out information in this area, you're never contacted. Nobody is interested in investigating it. It's considered the ultimate no-no, which is quite shocking. Now, this has been stated by the honest detective, James Rothstein, who to this day talks about all these terrible things going on and how children are molested and abused, ripped off the streets, and nobody cares. Well, how can this be? Nobody cares? There's no interest in it? Well, apparently there isn't, and you won't find a single law enforcement officer, as he stated, that will ever contact him to look into this, state, federal, or local. This is pretty frightening. This means the corruption level is so high, it is unbelievable. And this has been documented in the Franklin cover-up and other things as well. How does this fit with... Now, Michael Aquino was very sick in 2015, where he first got cancer and almost died. He then died 5 years later in 2020 as from cancer. And this has pretty much been confirmed. If people think he's, there's all sorts of the same rumors from unreliable people again. I mean, these people tell all sorts of tales, that he's hiding, that he isn't doing that he didn't die. Well, I think that's a little ridiculous. There certainly is no heat on Michael Aquino. There's actually no reason why he should disappear, or that he should make his life so restricted and terrible that he has to basically go into hiding. Why would you do that? This guy is wealthy. Nothing's ever happened to him. There certainly is nobody looking for him. And frankly, there is nothing more about him. There hasn't been reports of him doing much of anything for 20, 30 years. Now, we know he was his last 5 years, but I don't know when the reports came out that he was doing things in general here, when they particularly ended, these different cases and so forth. He claims he was active in the military to 1994. So, but that still means that in 1994 he retired. Now, what did he do? Where did he go? What are the reports after that? Well, most of these reports don't hold any water after the 1980s. And there's never a talk of this guy who was with Michael Aquino, this person. It's always just him. And again, I find this very suspicious that he would be the only one identified. And the reason why is because everyone knows his face. And everybody knows who he is. So this is an easy guy to identify. And I said 100 times, if you want to be trusted or think your story is true and you involve satanic abuse, what's going to happen is the fact that they're going to state that they saw you. Does that clarify your case? Oh, yeah, that Michael Aquino guy. Oh, yeah, you must really be telling the truth. This is a problem. So we have to be careful. And as I said, I'm not trying to cover up or justify anybody. This is a weird case. The fact that he's been named so many places makes it more and more suspicious. So it has nothing to do with that. The problem is now he is dead. So there's nobody even to bring to justice. But we should know who has been involved in these. We need to get the culprits, not the people who we don't like, people that we think are jerks. So the whole idea is that doesn't solve the problem. That doesn't bring the proper people to justice. We need to bring the proper people to justice. Who is involved with this? Who's doing this? What crimes have they committed? And we need to get in there and start actually prosecuting these people, which never gets done. The problem here is not Michael Aquino. It's not the process church. It's not Charles Manson. The bottom line, it's the fact that we have criminal organizations that are corrupt to the highest level, and nobody is prosecuting them. Our jails are full. 80%, 90% of the people in prisons are there for drug crimes. These are little guys that have done nothing, or very little, I should say, for things that should be handled differently if you're involved in drugs. So the whole idea is that's where the prisons are full of. Other problematic people and situations are not being dealt with. Organized crime, very few of these ever make it to prison, ever have problems. All of this stuff is what we have to look into. What is going on with these criminals, and let's bring them to justice. Let's not go out and lynch somebody because we don't like them, because they're public. Now, Aquino did all this because he was forced to, because he was named by an accuser as being a pedophile and molesting a particular 3-year-old girl. So the whole idea is that that's all part of the situation going on. And of course, that's why he did it. He didn't do it because he wanted to. He was forced to. And of course, once that happened, he decided to go public with it entirely. For better or worse, I'm not sure about that. Ultimately, all charges were dropped against him. They did not prosecute him for a number of what appeared to be bogus reasons. But the proof in this case, and not only was him, there was another person there who had 60 counts of molestation against him originally, were dropped down to 0. So there's some real problems there. But of course, it being handled by the military, you can guarantee that it's all screwed up and they have no idea what they're doing. And it's all corruption. That's what the military is about. It's pretty sad. That's also why the military has never achieved anything and never really won a war. So no matter what war we've been in, these incompetents have been able to do it, right down to Afghanistan, where they couldn't even handle the proper evacuation of people and turn something into the usual chaos because of their incompetency. And then after they milked that for all they could get, they went and milked another $100 billion to support Nazi criminals in the Ukraine. So the whole idea is we got to understand that that's how the military works. That's just not talk. Those are the facts, people. So the whole idea is we have to understand this and what's going on. And Aquino is another interesting case we're still looking into. And of course, he's made sure he's kept his life kind of foggy. And while in some ways he's very deliberate on where he was, what he was doing at certain times, at least the base he was at, he refuses to give you any kind of details. He also doesn't talk that much about his activities within the Temple of Set in terms of what was going on. He wrote a huge volume of I think it was 10 years that he was in the Church of Satan. He mapped out everything about that, kept every letter he ever had, and wrote a huge volume on them. What an interesting way to promote the Temple of Set indirectly by writing about the Church of Satan, which then steers them over to the Temple of Set without you talking about the Temple of Set. I mean, Michael Aquino didn't even know who the author of the Satanic Bible was. Anton LaVey never told him that entire book basically was plagiarized and even directly stolen from other sources. Nothing in that book was original from Anton LaVey, which I believe had a pea brain. I don't think there's anything profound about him. Aquino thinks at one end that he was a genius, but his book on the Church of Satan just is one attack on Anton LaVey after the other. So the whole idea is there is a serious problem there. So, he's very two-faced. He is a trickster, an intelligence officer. He's a psyops guy. His whole idea is to mentally trick and confuse you. How can we trust them? It's like trusting theatrical magicians, which, by the way, he was a very skilled one. Everything that he does is about tricking you. So what is that all about? And what levels did he go to? He has lots of opinions on everything from who shot JFK to the existence of extraterrestrials and advanced science. He's got a lot of opinions on these things, and most of it don't add up to anybody else's opinion. Is this fantasy that he's just talking about? He claims everybody likes him and my good friend, General this and General that. Well, they never said he was his good friend, so maybe we don't know. And behind closed doors or on a military base, Aquino was looked at as an intelligent, well-educated person, which he did. He taught at schools. He graduated lots of classes. This is what impresses the military, because they used to be labeled as just a bunch of dumb idiots. And when people got education and went to college, well, this was rare. And it started to be bigger in the 1970s and 80s, where people started to be educated. Before that, particularly the Army, were kind of a bunch of dummies. So whether he was beloved in the military or not, it's hard to say. Certainly there isn't people that seem to jump on his team. Nobody's written any forwards in his books thanking him or praising him as a general in his literature. So there's a lot of quasi patting on the back here, or at least what he states is there. Nor did anybody necessarily come to his aid during the problems at the Presidio with his accused pedophile activities with molestation. So none of that, there didn't seem to be any of that happening. So I don't know who his friends are, but this is very typical of how he talks. He also likes to talk like he is a Boy Scout. He claims he's very prudish about sex and everything else. You're prudish about sex and you're in the Church of Satan where they have naked altars? Well, what is he doing? If he's so sexually repressed, he's in a very obnoxious organization with nude altars there. So what is this all about? So, it's very contradictory. There's so many things about him that he won't release. He apparently has at least stepchildren, as many as possibly 3. We know at least 2, that Lilith at least has a son and a daughter, and we don't know if it's his or not. There may be another daughter involved or not. We know that Lilith had a brother, that his mother was living with him in San Francisco. This has been stated in his legal documents. So we just don't know. We don't know exactly where the father was. He talks nothing about it, even though he seems to have positive statements about his father. There's nothing talked about his father to any great extent except his military history and that he was a stockbroker. I don't know what that means. So he likes being an Army guy, that his father was apparently in the 3rd Army of Patton and got a Silver Heart. His mother was which kind of fits, his mother was a strange artistic woman and generally, and apparently from a wealthy family. So she was able to be kind of weird. And that seems to have passed off on Michael, that he got into this fantasy thing. He's a fantasist. He loves every little certificate he can get, even a fake certificate in the Order of the Dagon from the H.P. Lovecraft, the person who hated occultists and worked with Houdini. I wonder if old pseudo-intellectual knew that. He did get a PhD, which is unusual for a military guy, in sociology, I believe, or was it political science. And the whole idea is that, so he's got all this typical writer buffoonery nonsense. Plato's dialogues, Nietzsche's interpretation. And then, of course, he talks like, I don't know if he's ever mentioned Machiavelli, but it's very Machiavellian attitude, and that's what the actual, you like the big words? Anybody read Machiavelli? That's what the Satanic Bible is all about. It's pretty much Machiavellian. There's nothing overly strange about it, but basically it's Ragnar Redbeard's little macho, hate everybody diatribe that is what most of the Satanic Bible is. So it's the same old story there. So he went for years thinking that was perfect and that this came from Anton LaVey, that it had nothing to do with anybody else. I mean, that's how well read he is that he didn't know of that book. I've heard of that book, and certainly it's been reprinted. It was going around different occult circles for many years. So the whole idea, he didn't know that, he didn't know anything else. But, you'll get it, you'll certainly read that in the Church of Satan book that he's written, the history of them, and how he goes into all that, and he shows every letter he wrote, every burp he made is there, and everything he could state about Anton LaVey. I'm going to have to read this again because the problem with the Church of Satan is that they had a short eyes attitude, meaning young girls were seen as perfectly good to get involved sexually with. Now, this was a problem in the middle to early 60s, is that this was kind of common into the late 60s, that around Hollywood in particular, you would see 13, 14, 15-year-old girls everywhere. And they weren't there because they looked good. They were there to be sexually used. And lots of people let their young daughters do that because they want them to be connected with rich and powerful men. And how do you do that? Well, you get them into Hollywood. As much as people want to poo-poo it, Nicole Simpson, OJ's wife, well, she was hanging around professional sports players at a very young age. And that's how she got into that. That's how you get to the money when you don't have nothing but a body to go out and offer. And this is very common. So she and her friends and even her sister were all involved in these areas, getting hooked up with professional sports players who had lots of money, and particularly those that seemed to have been attracted to white girls. That's just the way it is. Now, Hollywood was notorious for this and most other areas. This doesn't in any way excuse it, but Anton LaVey's first wife, he married her after he got her pregnant, was 15. Well, did she have the baby at 15, which means he was involved with her at 14? So the whole idea is that that's the case. His daughter, Xena, got pregnant at 13. Well, this means that there's a very, very hazy line between Satanism and young girls. Now, they don't want to follow society anyway, so I'm sure this was justified. Now, how young that goes, it becomes a problem. So once you allow this kind of pedophilia, which is 13 and under, well, where does that stop? 10, 9, 8? So you have to draw a line somewhere. And of course, it gets hazy in a society with people that are, is a 16-year-old anywhere than an 18-year-old? Not really, but this is an artificial line. Is there a difference between a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old? Well, I think there is. So, we have to draw a line somewhere, and we have to understand that. And then there's the age of consent, which is generally 16 to 18. Some countries, like Japan and Germany, it's 14. So the whole idea is we need to understand that in terms of all of these things. So things get very kind of gray and hazy, and they don't look like that in modern times where this is so frowned upon. But in the 60s, there were lots and lots of very young girls hanging around sports stars, Hollywood stars, and in many places. And they were welcomed in because they were seen as sexual targets. So, point is that means does that spread into the Temple of Set? Was this something that they encouraged as well? I mean, when you start getting naked altars and what were considered orgies, which Aquino talks about, is kind of interesting. He also talked about that after the movie Eyes Wide Shut, that an organization was started out there. I think it was named the Castle. And they started having events around the world where they would have people in masks come in and do the kind of sexual activity that was in Eyes Wide Shut. And that this was an event, I guess you paid to do it, etc. He claimed that they called him to ask him about that. What? Another strange thing. How are you supposed to take this? Here's the sexual prude, as he said. I'm a sexual prude. I've only had sex with my 2 wives and no one else. Really? Come on. I don't believe that as being in the military, being thrown all over the world, which basically the military is just known for its promiscuous sexuality and its drug taking. I mean, that's all they do, particularly in the military. Everybody's humping everybody else in the military, and if you're a woman in there, you're humped 4 or 5 times a week by different guys, and that appears to be perfectly acceptable. So the point is that he's some sort of military prude. So he's the prude, the Satanist prude. What? I mean, that doesn't even add up. So he claims that he's this big prude. He's only had that. He's been linked to sex with at least one person, Linda Blood, who had an affair with him. Why should we state that? I guess she could write a book, but did that do anything? That was during the Satanic Panic. I guess maybe she thought she would make money off of it. None of his personal life has been talked about in the other book, The Magician, and not much was said about in the other book, The New Satanist by Linda Blood. So there wasn't any bedroom talk. There wasn't anything else about him because he's very litigious. But certainly, known details makes things very suspicious. But to think that this guy is some sort of prude is kind of insulting. But he's such a prude that he's called by a swinging club that wants to set up sex events to get his opinion on something. What? Why would he even say that? You first said you were a prude. He also said that, well, I've never attended things like that, but, the time is still open. Well, he's married at this time to Lilith and everything else, if he's such a prude, and he doesn't want to get involved in that. So he talks about, well, who knows? Well, that's a strange thing, from saying that I'm not interested in that, I'm a prude, to, hey, I'm open to going to sex parties. If I get enough invitations, maybe you want a free first-class ticket. I'm not sure what's there. Why would they call him? Why would a swingers club call Michael Aquino to ask if he had ideas about doing any of this? So how is that even linked to Satanism? Now, what I understood Eyes Wide Shut, and I've seen it once, it wasn't exactly a favorite movie of mine. I thought it was a little weird. And I'm sure it's true. I'm sure they had those parties. The bottom line is that why would they call him? I don't remember it being any way linked to Satanism. It was linked to mostly Illuminati, rich people's activities, these elite that do what they want. And certainly we know that sex is part of what the elite does without a problem. Now what they've done in recent years is not only do they want young girls, they're pedophiles. They want very young women. This is the whole new rage that is covered up. Sex has always been covered up, homosexuality, all the things that everybody is drawn to and compulsively gets involved in is part of the mainstream. Why would they call him? I find that very interesting, and he kind of jovial talked about it. Well, that certainly isn't a person who's a prude. So are you prudish when you blew the head off of so many people in Vietnam and killed and tortured people as part of your job? So I wonder about this prudish stuff. It doesn't add up. I mean, he deliberately stated he's only had sex with his 2 wives. I find that outrageously bogus. We've already got one person who's written about saying he got involved. So it's already pointing towards this is probably a lie. The problem is when you catch somebody in one lie, how many other lies did they state? So the whole idea is that an organization would call him and ask him about swing clubs. I don't know how they would think he would know anything, except for the fact of, I guess they're assuming that in the Church of Satan rituals, which has been stated that there was kind of a orgy went on where the altar served as a sexual outlet for anybody who wanted to have sex with them. And there's a reference to wearing masks. That in the Church of Satan, everybody wear masks and they had sex with anybody they want. And of course, this is a typical way of making everybody feel more comfortable. If you cover your face in those kind of situations, you feel in a whole different way, and then people aren't looking at you at a particular person. They're seeing a mask. So this is a great way to create sexual fun without the intimacy of knowledge of whom you're having sex with. So when you cover someone's face, well, it's the sex acts in the body. So that's what I'm assuming they called him to talk to him about. But I find that quite bizarre. And of course, that is something that is way after the Church of Satan incidents when he was involved in the Temple of Set. And as far as I understand, and I will be reading the books on the Temple of Set, all that kind of nude altar and everything else stuff is no longer, they don't do that per se in the average Temple of Set. But we do have to understand that the Temple of Set has a division called the Trapezoid Division. This was created by Anton LaVey, like everything else that Aquino has done. That Nazi magic area, which also involves S&M sexual practices, again, didn't come from the boring, dark state Satanists, because they never have any imagination. They never have anything to say can create anything. This is why Aquino copied the Golden Dawn for his practices with the Temple of Set. So the whole idea is we do know that there's an entire little group within the Temple of Set that is dedicated to S&M magical practices, and that Edred Thorson readily admits that he was part of the Marquis de Sade Society when he was in Germany, and that's when he hooked up with them and was a big practicing member. He's even written a little booklet on it that was published many years ago. A boring, terrible booklet, but the bottom line is that it was, and I believe there was a little book after that that I read a few years ago that may still be in print, because now Edred Thorson's the satanic Nazi that he is alleged to be, his books are published by all the major publishers. Bear Books, I think it's Simon & Schuster, or some of those. I think whoever it is, I'm not sure if that's the actual one there, but Bear Books is publishing his books. The Nazi Satanist, and of course the Jewish publisher, is publishing him. So the whole idea is that this is what's going on out there, and which has to be, people have to know this so they know what's going on. We can't criticize people on one way and then push money in their pockets in the other. So we do know that they published that book, and that person was a major part of the Temple of Set, which is the trapezoid division, the division that really Aquino was interested in but couldn't push it on the public, which was basically the Nazi magic division that studied runes and Himmler, all the stuff that really turned on Michael Aquino. I mean, if you want to see him get all up and horny, well, start talking about the little dagger from Himmler, and when he was in the castle, ooh, you probably see a noticeable bulge in his pants. So the whole idea is that's what he was really into. All this Egyptian stuff is a masking to kind of be public with. The bottom line is the Temple of Set is basically a Nazi magic group. That's what they are mostly into. But you're not going to sell that to the public. But that's what he was interested in. And I'm sure that's why he took Edred Thorson with him. And I don't know, I'm not sure if Aquino was running the Nazi magic division and then turned it over to Edred Flowers or not, or he was running that while in the Church of Satan. Either way, that's what really is the core of everything. And that's what he believes in, this bizarre higher state of consciousness through this disconnection with common morals and finding the higher morals of the uber type man, the higher man that doesn't follow the laws of regular society because he knows better. So, I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. But in terms of what's going on with him and any breakthroughs, that's the latest and greatest on him. As I come up with new information, I will be making, probably monthly reports or bi-monthly, depending on how the information comes through. But there isn't really much to report about him. We can't find any evidence of all these claims against him by these people who claim they were abused by him. There's no way to track that he was actually there without spending a huge amount of time. And the bottom line is they don't really are very cooperative. When you question them on what's going on, they don't really want to talk to you. And that tells me they're hiding something. It's not the fact that they don't want to discuss it. The fact is they don't want to be put to their feet to the fire, so to speak, and say, where's the beef? Where's the proof of this? Now, this doesn't in any way give anybody a clean bill of health of what they were involved in. We don't know. The fact that everybody names him is not, as far as I'm concerned, a vindication that he is guilty. I think it is the opposite. Why is everybody naming this one guy, and why is he so identified? Why does he use the term colonel? Why is he so known? What is all this? It seems to me that this guy would be spotted everywhere. And if he's using military bases, there's got to be all sorts of records. Well, we don't know what happened to these records. The military is a criminal gang that covers for each other. So you're not going to get anything out of there. So if you're an enlisted man and you're helping him on a plane or what's going on, well, you're not going to come out and say differently. You're not going to come out and say you saw him. So this is the problem with everything. And this is why, of course, we need whistleblower laws. Now, from what I understand, there are whistleblower laws, but we need better ones, and they need to be publicized. If you have real facts and information, and you need to be protected and so forth, particularly people in positions of power, like police officers, you need to be 100% protected. But when people try and come through or release information out of turn, you run into like Assange from WikiLeaks and Snowden. These people are hunted criminals. They're not covered by the Whistleblowing Act. They're covered as traitors. So we need great laws to protect people, and that's the only way we're going to get people to come forward. They come forward, the information is irrefutable, then we can start prosecuting people. That's the answer. That's what I like to bring. I have answers for everything. It's not complicated. What's complicated is that corruption stops anything from changing, or for those that are guilty for being brought to justice. It's just that simple. And there's ways to stop that with anti-corruption laws and protections for police officers that are honest, and military, government, etc. We need these laws desperately to protect the good people and bring them forward so that they are not persecuted and lose everything for the rest of their life. It's that simple. It's not that hard. We got $40 billion to give to Nazi Ukrainians. We certainly can take that money and use it for saving our own country and the world. Until next time.